If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're ready for a tale of lost redemption and finding home in the most unexpected place, hit that like button and let's begin. Eleanor Whitman had built her entire world on control. For 30 years, she'd mastered every boardroom, every negotiation, every crisis. But on a snowy mountain road in the middle of nowhere with her car wrapped around a tree and her phone showing no signal, she realized that control had always been an illusion. The board had voted her out that morning. By noon, the media had turned her name into a scandal. By evening, she was driving nowhere in particular, and now she was walking through a blizzard toward what looked like a light in the distance. When the door of a small cabin opened, she expected judgment. She expected recognition. Instead, a weathered man with kind eyes and a 10-year-old girl peeking from behind him simply asked, "Are you hurt?" Eleanor Whitman, who'd spent 3 decades being someone, was about to discover what it meant to be no one at all. And in that nothingness, she would find everything she'd never known she was missing. The CEO who lost everything found hope in a single father's cabin. Eleanor's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She gripped the leather steering wheel of her Mercedes, one of the few possessions she'd grabbed before leaving the penthouse, and tried to focus on the white line barely visible through the snow. The wipers beat frantically against the windshield, a rhythm that matched her pulse, but did nothing to clear her view. 32 years. That's how long she'd given to Whitman Industries. 32 years of 14-hour days of sacrificed weekends, of relationships that withered because she chose spreadsheets over dinners and acquisitions over anniversaries. She'd built that company from her father's failing textile business into a multinational conglomerate worth $3 billion. And this morning in a conference room with windows overlooking the city she'd conquered, they'd taken it from her in 17 minutes. "The board feels it's time for new leadership," Richard Chen had said, not quite meeting her eyes. Richard, whom she'd mentored. Richard, who'd once told her she was the smartest person he had ever worked with. The accusations had been carefully worded. Financial irregularities, aggressive expansion, risk exposure. None of it was technically false, but none of it told the whole truth either. She'd made the moves she'd needed to make, taken the risks that created empires. But someone had decided those risks were now liabilities, and in the corporate world, perception mattered more than reality. By the time she returned to her office, escorted by security, as if she might steal something from the company she'd built, her assistant was gone. Her nameplate was gone. Her access codes had been revoked. She'd become a ghost in her own empire. The media had been waiting downstairs. Cameras flashing questions shouted her face already on screens with words like "scandal" and "fall from grace" beneath it. She'd walk through them with her head high, the way she'd trained herself to walk through everything, but inside she was collapsing. Now, 8 hours later, she was somewhere in the Cascade Mountains with no destination in mind and a gas tank approaching empty. The road curved sharply. Eleanor turned the wheel, but the Mercedes didn't respond. The tires found ice instead of asphalt, and suddenly the world was spinning. She saw trees, sky snow trees again. The impact threw her against the seatbelt hard enough to steal her breath. Metal screamed, glass shattered, and then silence. Eleanor sat in the wreckage, steam rising from the crumpled hood, and started to laugh. It was a hollow, broken sound that scared her more than the crash had. Of course, this was how the day would end. She tried her phone. No signal. The screen showed 8:47 p.m. and a battery at 32%. She'd left the city at 2 in the afternoon, driving without thinking, taking turns randomly fleeing everything she'd known. Outside, the snow fell heavier now. The temperature was dropping. She could feel it even inside the car. The engine had died on impact, and she knew enough about mountain winters to understand what that meant. Stay with the vehicle. That's what they always said. Wait for help. But no one knew where she was. Her assistant was gone. She had no family. She'd let those relationships atrophy decades ago. Friends, the people she'd called friends, were colleagues, and colleagues had a way of forgetting your number the moment you lost your title. Eleanor looked at the darkness beyond her shattered windshield. Snow was already accumulating on the hood. If she stayed here, she would freeze. If she walked, she might freeze faster. She chose to walk. The cold hit her like a physical force when she pushed the door open. She'd left the city in a business suit, and heels had grabbed only her cashmere coat and leather briefcase before fleeing the penthouse. Now standing in snow that reached her calves, she realized how monumentally unprepared she was for anything real. But then she'd always been unprepared for anything real. She'd just been good at hiding it behind competence and control. Eleanor started walking back the way she'd come, though the way she'd come was just a guess in the whiteout. She left the briefcase in the car. What good were contracts and files now, but kept her phone, though it was already dying in the cold. The snow found its way into her shoes immediately. Her coat, expensive as it was, hadn't been designed for survival. Within 10 minutes, she couldn't feel her feet. Within 20, her hands were numb despite being buried in her pockets. She thought about her father. He died when she was 19, leaving her a business that was bleeding money and a choice: save it or let it die with him. She'd saved it. She'd sacrificed everything: college friends, any semblance of a normal young adulthood, to prove she could. Never let them see you weak, he'd told her once during one of the rare moments when the cancer pain broke through his medication. The moment they think you're weak, they'll take everything. Well, they'd taken everything anyway. Eleanor stumbled over something hidden beneath the snow and fell hard. Her hands broke her fall, sinking into deep powder, and the cold burned against her palms. She stayed there for a moment on her knees in the snow and wondered if this was where it ended. It would be almost poetic. The woman who'd built everything dying with nothing. But something in her, the same stubborn thing that had kept her in that office at 19 working 20-hour days to save a company she didn't fully understand yet, made her stand up. She kept walking. Time became meaningless. There was only cold and dark and the endless white fall of snow. Her thoughts started to scatter. She caught herself thinking about a board meeting from 15 years ago, then a dress she'd worn to some gala, then the taste of coffee from her favorite cafe, the one that had closed 5 years ago. Or was it 10? She was dying. She understood that now. Her body was shutting down, her mind following. That's when she saw the light. At first she thought it was a hallucination, a warm golden glow in the distance, steady against the storm. But as she walked toward it, stumbled toward it, the light held. It grew closer, resolved into a window, a cabin. Eleanor's numbed mind couldn't quite process it. She was in the middle of nowhere, miles from any town, and there was a cabin with lights on and smoke curling from a chimney. She reached the door more by falling against it than walking to it. Her hands were too numb to knock properly, so she hit it with her shoulder, a graceless thump that she hoped was loud enough to hear inside. The door opened. A man stood there, backlit by warmth and firelight. He was maybe a few years younger than her, with the kind of weathered face that came from outdoor work rather than office stress. His hair was dark with threads of gray, and his eyes, she noticed, his eyes immediately were cautious, but not unkind. "Jesus," he said, which wasn't quite the greeting she'd expected. "Are you hurt?" Eleanor tried to answer, but her jaw was shaking too hard. She might have said cold, or help, or maybe nothing at all. Her legs chose that moment to give up entirely. The man caught her before she hit the porch. His hands were strong and warm, and she had the distant thought that she should protest, should stand on her own, should maintain some dignity. Then she was inside, and the warmth hit her like a wall, and everything went dark. When Eleanor woke, she was on a couch near a fireplace, buried under what felt like 6 blankets. Her shoes were gone. Her coat was draped over a chair, steam rising from it. Her feet hurt, a deep burning ache that meant they were thawing. "Don't move too fast," a voice said. Eleanor turned her head. The man from the door sat in a wooden chair a few feet away, a mug in his hands. In the better light, she could see more of him: the flannel shirt, the worn jeans, the calluses on his fingers. He looked like someone who worked with his hands, who knew how to fix things. "You're lucky I stayed up reading," he continued. "Usually we're asleep by 9 out here." "We," Eleanor's voice came out as a rasp. "My daughter and me." He gestured toward the loft area above them. "She's asleep. You gave us quite a scare when you collapsed." "I'm sorry." The words were automatic, corporate. "Apologize for the inconvenience, maintain goodwill, keep the relationship functional. Don't apologize for nearly freezing to death." He walked to a small kitchen area and came back with another mug. "Here, tea, chamomile, it'll help." Eleanor took the mug with hands that still shook. The warmth against her palms was almost painful. "Thank you." They sat in silence while she drank. The tea was simple, slightly sweet, the kind of thing she hadn't bothered with in years. Coffee had been her fuel, strong, black constant. But this was comforting in a way she'd forgotten things could be. "What were you doing out there?" the man asked finally. It was a reasonable question. Eleanor had no reasonable answer. "Driving," she said. "In that storm, you must have been heading somewhere important." "No, nowhere, just driving." He studied her for a moment, and Eleanor wondered what he saw. Her suit was rumpled, but still obviously expensive. Her jewelry, she still wore the Cartier watch, the pearl earrings marked her as someone with money. But her face, she knew, probably showed the truth. She was broken. "Car trouble?" he asked. "You could say that." She took another sip of tea. "I crashed, about a mile back, maybe more. I couldn't tell in the storm." "Jesus," he said again. "And you walked from there. Seemed better than freezing in the car." "Barely." He shook his head. That's that's actually lucky. Another 20 minutes, and I don't think you would have made it." Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him. There was no recognition in his eyes, no awareness of who she was, what she'd been. To him, she was just a woman who'd nearly died in a snowstorm. It was the most anonymous she'd felt in 30 years. "I'm Caleb," he said. "Caleb Morgan." She almost said her full name, Eleanor Whitman, CEO but she caught herself. That woman didn't exist anymore. "Eleanor," she said simply. "Well, Eleanor, you're welcome to stay until the storm passes. Should be morning, maybe longer. I've got a spare room, really just a storage area, but there's a cot. You can dry out, get warm, and tomorrow we'll figure out what to do about your car." "I can pay you," Eleanor said automatically, "for the trouble, for the room." Something flickered in Caleb's expression, not quite offense, but close. "I'm not running a hotel. You needed help. That's what people do out here." Eleanor felt heat in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "Of course, I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "It's fine." He stood gathering his own empty mug. "You've had a rough day, I'm guessing. Get some rest. We'll talk more in the morning." He disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Eleanor alone with the fire and the weight of the day. She should have felt relieved, safe, but instead she felt hollow. For 30 years, she'd known exactly who she was. Eleanor Whitman, CEO for a force of nature woman who'd turned failure into fortune. And now sitting in a stranger's apartment with borrowed warmth and tea, she was just Eleanor. Just a person who'd lost everything. Just someone who didn't know what came next. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the loft, she heard a child shift in sleep. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountains. And Eleanor Whitman, who'd spent her entire life being someone important, closed her eyes and let herself be no one at all. When she woke again, pale light was filtering through the cabin windows. The storm had quieted to a steady snowfall, and the cabin was filled with the smell of coffee and something cooking. Eleanor sat up slowly. Her body ached, deep muscle aches from the cold, from the crash, from the walk. Her feet were still sore, but the burning had faded to a dull throb. Someone had left a pair of thick wool socks next to the couch. She put them on, then stood testing her balance. Steady enough, the cabin looked different in daylight, smaller than she'd thought, but well-maintained. Wood furniture that had been built to last rather than to impress. Books on shelves. Children's drawings stuck to the refrigerator with magnets. A life that was simple but full. "You're up," Eleanor turned. A girl stood at the base of the loft stairs, maybe 10 years old, with dark hair in a messy braid and eyes that were studying Eleanor with intense curiosity. "I'm Sophie," the girl said. "Dad says you got lost in the storm." "That's accurate," Eleanor said. "Are you running away from something?" The bluntness of children. Eleanor had forgotten about that. In her world, everyone spoke in layers of meaning, every sentence calculated for maximum impact with minimum vulnerability. "Yes," Eleanor said, because lying to a child seemed pointless. "I suppose I am." And Sophie considered this. "Dad says running away doesn't fix things, but sometimes you need to run anyway." Before Eleanor could respond to that unexpected wisdom, Caleb emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 plates. "Sophie, go wash up for breakfast," he said. The girl bounded off, and Caleb handed Eleanor one of the plates. Eggs, toast, some kind of potato hash. Simple food, but it smelled better than anything from the 5-star restaurants she'd frequented. "How are you feeling?" Caleb asked. "Sore, but alive. Thank you for everything." He nodded, sitting down at a small table by the window. Eleanor joined him, and they ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. "I called the ranger station this morning. Caleb said eventually. Told them about your car. They'll send someone to check it out once the roads are clear, but that might be a few days. This storm's supposed to get worse before it gets better. A few days. The thought should have alarmed her. She had things to do, people to call, a crisis to manage, except she didn't. Not anymore. I don't want to impose, Eleanor said. When you're not. We don't get many visitors out here, especially in winter. Sophie's already planning to talk your ear off about her school project. Eleanor looked out the window. Snow was piling up against the cabin walls, pristine and endless. Somewhere beyond that white expanse was her wrecked car, her previous life, the scandal that was probably still playing out on every business channel. Here in this cabin, none of that existed. Okay, she said quietly. A few days. Caleb smiled, a small thing, but genuine. Good. Fair warning, we're pretty boring out here. No TV, internet's spotty at best. Mostly we read cook and try not to go stir crazy. That sounds... Eleanor paused, searching for the word. Perfect. And somehow impossibly she meant it. The first day passed in a strange dreamlike haze. Eleanor helped Sophie with her school project, something about the water cycle, and found herself explaining things in ways she hadn't thought about since her own childhood. She chopped vegetables for dinner while Caleb cooked, their movements around the small kitchen, strangely synchronized despite being strangers. That night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Eleanor and Caleb sat by the fire with tea. So, Caleb said carefully, I don't want to pry, but are people looking for you? Should I be worried that I'm harboring a fugitive? Eleanor laughed, a real laugh, not the polished chuckle she'd perfected for business dinners. No, I'm not a fugitive, just someone who needed to get away. She stared into the fire, watching flames consume wood. My life, I suppose. Or what used to be my life. Caleb didn't push, which Eleanor appreciated. In her world, silence was a negotiation tactic, something to be filled with words before the other side gained advantage. But here, silence was just silence. I lost my job, she said finally, yesterday after 32 years. Jesus, I'm sorry. Don't be. They were probably all right to let me go. She took a sip of tea. I built something big, but along the way I forgot why I was building it. By the end, I was just going through the motions, making money to make more money, winning battles I'd already won. Sounds lonely. The word hit her harder than she expected. Yes, it was. They sat with that for a while. What about you, Eleanor asked. What brings someone to a cabin in the middle of nowhere? Caleb's expression shifted, not quite closing off, but retreating. That's a longer story. We seem to have time. He smiled faintly. Fair point. He set down his mug, leaning back in his chair. I grew up in Seattle, worked in manufacturing, quality control for a tech components company. Had a wife, a daughter, a mortgage, the whole suburban dream. Eleanor noticed his use of past tense. There was an acquisition, Caleb continued. New ownership decided to restructure, which meant closing our plant. 400 people out of work, including me. My wife, Rachel, she took a second job to help make ends meet while I was job hunting. Night shifts at a distribution center. His voice went quiet. She fell asleep on the drive home one morning. Hit a semi-truck on I-90. Died instantly. Caleb, Don't. He held up a hand, gentle but firm. I've heard every condolence. They don't help. Nothing helps except time, and even that's debatable. Eleanor understood. She'd lost her father to cancer, and the parade of sympathy had felt like salt in an open wound. People meant well, but their words couldn't fill the void. Sophie was 6, Caleb said. Old enough to understand her mom was gone, young enough to not fully grasp what that meant. I couldn't keep working, couldn't stand being in the city anymore. So I took what money we had left, bought this place, and we moved out here. How long ago? 4 years. Sophie barely remembers the city now. This is her world, trees and snow and quiet. Eleanor looked around the cabin with new understanding. This wasn't an escape. It was a refuge carefully built from grief. Do you regret it? She asked. Leaving everything behind. Caleb thought of that. Yes. Some days, I miss certain things, good coffee, decent pizza, seeing movies when they're actually in theaters. But mostly no, out here, I get to be Sophie's dad without distraction. That's enough. Eleanor envied him, envied the clarity of his purpose, the simplicity of his life. She'd spent 3 decades chasing bigger, better, more, And at the end of it all, she had nothing that mattered. "You'll figure it out," Caleb said as if reading her thoughts. "Whatever you're running from, whatever you lost, you'll figure out what comes next. How can you be sure because you walk through a blizzard instead of giving up? That takes a particular kind of stubborn." Eleanor smiled despite herself. "Is that a compliment?" "Out here, absolutely." They talked until the fire burned low about nothing and everything. Caleb told her about the land, about Sophie's obsession with birds, about the challenges of homeschooling and isolation. Eleanor found herself sharing stories from her childhood, things she hadn't thought about in years. Her father's laugh, her mother's absence she'd left when Eleanor was 12, unable to handle her husband's workaholic tendencies. The small apartment where she'd grown up, always clean, but never quite warm. When Eleanor finally went to bed in the small storage room which Caleb had made surprisingly comfortable, with the cot, clean sheets, and a pile of quilts, she realized something strange. For the first time in 30 years, she'd spent an entire evening not thinking about work. Not about acquisitions or quarterly reports or board politics, just talking, being present, being a person instead of a position. She pulled the quilts up to her chin, listening to the wind howl outside, and felt something she couldn't quite name. It might have been peace, or it might have been the first crack in the armor she'd built around herself, the beginning of a breaking that would hurt before it healed. Either way, there was no going back. The woman who'd driven into the storm was gone, left behind with the wrecked Mercedes and the empire she'd lost. Whoever Eleanor was now, whoever she would become, was still being written. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't in control of the story. The second Eleanor woke to the sound of Sophie's laughter filtering through the cabin walls. She lay still for a moment, disoriented. The storage room was dim morning light, barely penetrating the small window near the ceiling. The quilts were heavy and warm, cocooning her in a way that made her want to sink back into sleep. When had she last slept past 6 a.m.? When had she last woken without immediately reaching for her phone to check emails, market reports, crisis alerts? Her phone sat on the small table Caleb had brought in dead now. She'd watched the battery percentage drop throughout yesterday, 30%, 15.5 until it finally gave up. She hadn't asked to charge it. Caleb had a generator, she knew, but something stopped her from requesting access to that tether to her old life. Eleanor pushed back the quilts and stood, her muscles protesting. The wool socks were still on her feet, oversized and warm. Her suit hung on a hook Caleb had installed. He'd washed it, somehow dried it by the fire. The gesture was small, but it struck her deeply. When had anyone last done something for her without expecting something in return? She dressed slowly, her fingers fumbling with the buttons that seemed more complicated than they should be. The suit felt wrong now, too tight, too formal. A costume from a play that had closed. When she emerged from the storage room, the cabin was already alive with morning activity. Sophie sat at the table, papers spread out in front of her, tongue between her teeth in concentration. Caleb stood at the stove, flipping what looked like pancakes. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Coffee's on the counter. Mugs are in the cabinet above." Eleanor poured herself a cup, grateful. The coffee was strong and slightly bitter. Nothing like the precision-calibrated espresso from her office machine, but somehow better for its simplicity. "What are you working on?" Eleanor asked Sophie, coming to stand by the table. "Math," Sophie said with the heavy sigh of a child carrying the weight of the world. "Division. It's stupid." "Division isn't stupid," Eleanor said, surprising herself by sitting down. "It's just multiplication backwards." Sophie looked up, skeptical. "That doesn't make it easier." "Let me see." For the next 20 minutes, Eleanor found herself teaching division to a 10-year-old, breaking down concepts she'd used daily in business, but never thought to explain in basic terms. Sophie was bright, quick to grasp patterns once they were presented clearly. "You're good at this," Caleb said, setting down a plate of pancakes at Eleanor's elbow. "Ever teach before?" "No, I spent most of my time telling people what to do, not helping them understand why." "There's a difference. A significant one, apparently." They ate breakfast together, the three of them crowded around the small table. Sophie chattered about a fox she'd seen the day before, about the book she was reading, about whether snowflakes really were all unique or if that was just something adults said. Eleanor listened, contributing occasionally, but mostly just absorbing. This was what family looked like, she realized. Not scheduled dinners at restaurants with cloth napkins and silent phones. Not the careful choreography of corporate entertaining. Just people together, sharing space and time. After breakfast, Sophie disappeared into the loft with her books, and Caleb started clearing dishes. "Let me help," Eleanor said. "You don't have to." "I want to." So she washed while he dried their hands, occasionally brushing in the soapy water. The silence between them was comfortable, broken only by the clink of dishes and Sophie's footsteps overhead. "The storm's supposed to break this afternoon," Caleb said eventually. "Rangers might be able to get to your car tomorrow." Tomorrow, the word carried weight. Tomorrow meant decisions, meant returning to the world, meant facing whatever waited for her beyond this cabin. "Good," Eleanor said, not meaning it. Caleb glanced at her. "You don't sound convinced." "I'm not sure what I'm going back to. The job is gone. The apartment." She paused, thinking of the penthouse she'd lived in for 15 years, the place she'd never really made a home. "I'll probably have to sell it. The scandal, the media attention, it's not going to just disappear. So don't go back." Eleanor looked at him, startled. "What? Don't go back? Not right away anyway." He set down the dish towel, leaning against the counter. "Look, I know it's not my business. You've got a life, responsibilities, things to deal with. But you showed up here running from something, and maybe you haven't run far enough yet. I can't just stay here." "Why not?" It was such a simple question, but Eleanor had no simple answer. Because she had obligations. She didn't anymore. Because people needed her. They'd replaced her in 17 minutes, because this wasn't her life, but what was her life now? "I'd be imposing," she said finally. "Sophie likes you. I like having another adult to talk to. And honestly, you look like you could use a few more days of not being whoever you were before." "I don't even know who that is anymore." "Exactly." Caleb smiled. "So take some time to figure it out." Eleanor opened her mouth to protest, to list all the logical reasons why staying was impossible, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she heard herself say, "A few more days, if you're sure." "When I'm sure. Now, you up for a walk? I need to check the generator in the woodpile. Could use an extra pair of hands." An hour later, Eleanor found herself outside in borrowed boots that were too big and a parka that smelled like pine and wood smoke. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed. Snow covered everything in smooth, pristine drifts that caught the weak sunlight and threw it back in 1,000 tiny diamonds. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Caleb said, trudging ahead of her toward a shed set back from the cabin. Beautiful wasn't the word Eleanor would have chosen. Overwhelming, maybe. Alien. She'd spent so much of her life in climate-controlled spaces, viewing weather as an inconvenience to be managed, that she'd forgotten nature could be this present. "It's quiet," she said. "Too quiet for some people. Drives them crazy after a while." "And you?" "I like the quiet. After the noise of the city, after—" He trailed off, but Eleanor understood. After loss, quiet was a refuge. They reached the shed, and Caleb began the practical work of winter survival, checking fuel levels, testing the generator, assessing the wood supply. Eleanor helped where she could, following instructions, learning the mechanics of living in a place where convenience wasn't guaranteed. "We'll need more wood," Caleb said, studying the depleted pile. "There's a fallen oak about a quarter-mile east. If the snow's not too deep, we could cut some today." "I've never cut wood before," Eleanor admitted. "First time for everything." They spent the afternoon in manual labor that left Eleanor's muscles burning and her hands blistered, despite the gloves Caleb loaned her. He taught her how to use a chainsaw, how to judge where a cut should go, how to split logs with an axe and a wedge. She was terrible at it, but Caleb never made her feel incompetent. He corrected her stance, showed her again when she forgot, laughed with her when a log rolled away before she could split it. "You're getting it," he said, watching her finally split a piece cleanly. "Natural athlete," Eleanor snorted. "I haven't done anything athletic since mandatory gym class in high school." "What did you do instead?" "For fun, I mean." The question stopped her. Fun. When had she last done something just for fun? "I worked," she said quietly. "That was what I did." Caleb leaned on his axe, studying her. "Every day. Pretty much. Weekends, holidays. There was always something that needed attention, always a fire to put out, always a deal to close." "That sounds exhausting." "It was. Eleanor set down her own axe, her arms trembling slightly. But I told myself it was worth it, that I was building something important. Was it important? She thought about Whitman Industries, the factories, the kids, the quarterly earnings that had made shareholders wealthy. Important to whom? The board that had ousted her, the employees she'd rarely interacted with directly. The bottom line she'd served so faithfully. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe once. But by the end, I think I was just going through the motions. Building for the sake of building. They worked in silence for a while longer, and Eleanor found a rhythm in the physical labor. Swing, strike, split. Swing, strike, split. There was something meditative about it, something that quieted the constant chatter in her mind. When they finally returned to the cabin, pulling a sled loaded with wood, the sun was setting. Sophie met them at the door, bouncing with news about a bird she'd identified from one of her books. A varied thrush, she announced. They're not usually here in winter, but climate change is making their migration patterns weird. That's fascinating, Eleanor said and meant it. When had she last found genuine interest in something outside her narrow professional scope? Dinner that night was a communal effort. Sophie set the table with elaborate care, creating place settings with folded napkins and the fancy plates, which were just slightly less chipped than the everyday ones. Caleb cooked venison stew from meat he had hunted the previous fall. Eleanor chopped vegetables, following his quiet directions, learning to dice without measuring to season by taste rather than recipe. The stew was rich and warm, the kind of meal that settled into your bones. They ate by candlelight, Caleb conserving generator fuel, and Sophie talked about her books, her birds, the garden she wanted to plant in spring. Maybe Eleanor will still be here to help, Sophie said innocently. Sophie, Caleb said, a gentle warning. It's okay, Eleanor said. I don't know where I'll be in the spring. It was the most honest thing she'd said in days. After dinner, after Sophie had been tucked into bed, with promises that yes, they'd look for the varied thrush tomorrow, Eleanor and Caleb returned to their evening ritual by the fire. Tell me about your wife, Eleanor said. It was bold, maybe too bold, but she wanted to know. Caleb stared into the flames for a long moment. Rachel was steady. I was always chasing the next thing, the next promotion, the next milestone. She kept me grounded, reminded me what mattered. Sophie looks like her. Yeah, same eyes, same stubborn streak. He smiled. Rachel would have liked you, I think. She appreciated people who said what they meant. I'm not sure I've said what I mean in years. You're saying it now. Eleanor considered that. It's easier here, without all the noise. What kind of noise? The kind that tells you who you should be, what you should want, how you should act. In the city and business, there's always someone watching, judging, keeping score. You learn to perform the right version of yourself. And which version was that? The strong one, the competent one, the one who never admits weakness or doubt. Eleanor traced the rim of her mug. I got very good at that performance. What about the real you? I'm not sure there's much difference anymore. I've been performing for so long, I think I forgot there was supposed to be someone underneath. Caleb was quiet for a moment, then said, You know what Sophie said to me this morning? She said you seem sad, but trying not to show it. Kids see things adults miss. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. She's perceptive. She is, lost her mom young, so she learned to read people carefully. Make sure they're okay. He paused. Are you okay? The question was simple, direct, impossible to deflect. No, Eleanor said. I'm not. I don't know what I am. That's a start. They sat with that admission between them, the fire crackling, the cabin creaking in the evening wind. When Rachel died, Caleb said slowly, people kept telling me I'd find a new normal. I hated that phrase, made it sound like I'd just replace her slot, a new life, into the space she left. But they were kind of right, not about replacing her, but about finding something new. You don't go back to who you were before. You become someone different. Someone better. Sometimes just someone who knows more about pain. He looked at her. You lost something too. Maybe not a person, but a version of yourself you had built everything around. That's a kind of grief. Eleanor had never thought of it that way. But yes, grief was exactly what this was. The hollow ache, the disorientation, the sense that the world had fundamentally shifted beneath her feet. How long does it take, she asked, to find that new normal? I'll let you know when I get there. She appreciated his honesty. No platitudes, no false promises. That time heals all wounds. Just the truth, sometimes you hurt and you keep hurting and you learn to build a life anyway. Thank you, Eleanor said, for letting me stay, for not asking too many questions. Everyone deserves a place to land when they're falling. The words settled into her chest, warm and heavy. When had she ever been someone's safe landing place? When had anyone been hers? They talked late into the night about Rachel, about Eleanor's father, about the choices they'd made and the ones they regretted. Caleb told her about moving to the cabin, about Sophie's adjustment, about the loneliness that sometimes felt like a physical weight. Eleanor told him about her mother leaving, about her father's impossible standards, about the moment she decided to prove herself by saving a failing business. I was 19, she said. I should have been at college figuring out who I wanted to be. Instead, I was in boardrooms trying to convince men twice my age that I knew what I was doing. Did you? Absolutely not, but I learned fast and I worked harder than anyone. Within 5 years, the company was profitable. Within 10, it was thriving, and I told myself the sacrifice was worth it. But, but I looked up one day and I was 45 and alone. No family, no real friends, no life outside of work. Just money and success and this hollow feeling I couldn't name. What did you do? I worked more. Figured if I could just get to the next milestone, acquire the next company, hit the next revenue target, the hollow feeling would go away. She laughed bitterly. It never did. Caleb nodded slowly. Rachel used to say the problem with chasing horizons is they keep moving. You never actually get there. She sounds wise. She was. I miss her wisdom almost as much as I miss her laugh. The fire had burned down to embers, throwing dancing shadows across the walls. Outside, an owl called long and lonesome. I should let you sleep, Caleb said, standing. Big day tomorrow, if the Rangers can get through. Eleanor stood too suddenly reluctant for the night to end. These conversations with Caleb felt like excavation, carefully uncovering parts of herself she'd buried so deep she'd forgotten they existed. Caleb, he turned. I don't want to go back, not to that life. I don't know what comes next, but it's not that. He smiled, that small, genuine smile she was learning to recognize. Then don't. Figure out what does come next. You've got time. That night, lying in the narrow cot under the heavy quilts, Eleanor thought about time. She'd spent 3 decades racing against it, fighting it, trying to cram more productivity into every hour. Now, for the first time, she had time stretching ahead of her with no clear destination. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like possibility. Through the thin walls, she could hear Caleb moving around the cabin, banking the fire, checking locks, the domestic rituals of someone who'd made a home from loss. Eleanor closed her eyes and tried to imagine what her own home might look like. Not the penthouse with its floor-to-ceiling windows and cold marble surfaces. Something smaller, warmer, real. She was still imagining when sleep found her, pulling her down into dreams that, for once, weren't filled with board meetings and hostile takeovers. Instead, she dreamed of snow-covered forests and firelight, of splitting wood and learning to see birds, of a life measured in moments instead of milestones, of becoming someone new from the fragments of who she'd been. The Ranger truck arrived late the following morning, 4-wheel drive, grinding through snow that had drifted across the access road. Eleanor watched from the cabin window as Caleb went out to meet them, 2 men in official parkas, their breath making clouds in the cold air. She should have gone out too, should have taken charge of the situation the way she always had, but she stayed inside, Sophie beside her. Both of them silent witnesses to the conversation unfolding in the yard. After 15 minutes, Caleb came back in, alone, snow clinging to his boots. Your car's totaled, Pero, he said without preamble. Frame's bent, engine block cracked. Even if they could tow it out, it's not worth fixing. Eleanor nodded slowly. Somehow she'd known. The Mercedes had been more than transportation. It had been a symbol, a marker of success. Of course it was gone. Everything else was. They can file the insurance report, Caleb continued. You'll need to call your company once you get phone service. And they asked. He hesitated. What if you needed a ride somewhere, to town or to the city? They've got room in the truck. This was it then, the moment when her retreat ended and real life resumed. Eleanor looked around the cabin at Sophie, pretending to read her book, while obviously listening at the fire still burning low in the grate, at the simple wooden furniture that had become familiar over the past 3 days. "Tell them no," she said. "I'm not ready yet." Caleb's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Relief, maybe, or understanding. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. A few more days. I need a few more days." He went back outside, had a brief exchange with the rangers, and then they were gone, the sound of their truck fading into the white silence of the forest. Sophie immediately abandoned her pretense of reading. "You're staying just a little longer," Eleanor said. "That's what Dad said when we first moved here. Just until I figure things out. That was 4 years ago." Eleanor laughed despite herself. "I won't stay 4 years, I promise." But as the day wore on, she wondered what promise she was really making. To Sophie, to Caleb, or to herself, that she wouldn't let herself get too comfortable in this refuge, wouldn't let herself believe that running from her problems was the same as solving them. That afternoon, Caleb took them on a walk through the forest. Sophie had her bird book and binoculars practically vibrating with the hope of spotting the very thrush again. Eleanor wore the borrowed parka and boots, following their tracks through snow that sparkled under weak sunlight. "There," Sophie whispered, urgently pointing. Eleanor looked where the girl indicated and saw a bird with an orange breast and dark markings perched on a snow-laden branch. It was beautiful in an understated way, perfectly adapted to its environment. "Make a wish," Sophie said seriously. "When you see something rare, you're supposed to make a wish." "I don't think that's a real rule," Caleb said, but he was smiling. "It's my rule." Sophie closed her eyes, lips moving silently. Eleanor closed her eyes too, though she wasn't sure what to wish for. Safety seemed redundant. She was safe here, clarity, peace, the ability to figure out who she was supposed to be now. In the end, she wished for time. Just more time before she had to face everything waiting for her beyond these mountains. That evening, after Sophie went to bed, Eleanor helped Caleb with the dishes again. Their routine had become comfortable. She washed, he dried. They talked about nothing important while the fire crackled behind them. "You know you can't hide here forever," Caleb said quietly. Eleanor's hands stilled in the soapy water. "I know. But I don't know what I'm going back to. The scandal's probably still churning. My reputation, everything I built, it's all tainted now. Even if I wanted to start over in business, who would work with me? So don't go back to business. That's all I know how to do." "That's not true. You've been teaching Sophie math, helping with chores, splitting wood. You're capable of more than you think." "Those aren't careers, Caleb. They're—" She stopped, hearing how dismissive she sounded. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." But his voice wasn't angry, just matter of fact. "You're still measuring worth by the old standards. Big job, big salary, big impact. But impact comes in lots of forms." Eleanor turned to face him fully. "What kind of impact do I have here? I'm a middle-aged woman having an extended breakdown in your cabin. You made Sophie laugh this morning. Really laugh the way she used to with your mom. You split 3 cords of wood with what complaining? You're learning." He set down the dish towel. "You think that doesn't matter? It matters to you, maybe. To Sophie? But in the broader world—" "Fuck the broader world." Eleanor blinked, startled. Caleb so rarely cursed, especially not with that kind of vehemence. "Sorry," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "But I mean it. The broader world didn't care when Rachel died. It didn't care when 400 people lost their jobs because some corporation decided profit margins mattered more than lives. The broader world is full of people making decisions that destroy other people, and they sleep fine at night because they've convinced themselves they're doing important work." "You're talking about my company," Eleanor said slowly. "Whitman Industries. We acquired your plant." The silence that fell was different from their comfortable quiet. This was heavy, loaded with things unsaid. "Yes," Caleb said finally. "I looked you up yesterday, used the satellite internet while you and Sophie were reading." Eleanor felt ice forming in her chest. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because at first I was angry, then I was confused. Then I realized—" He ran a hand through his hair. "You didn't know, when you made that acquisition, approved that closure, you didn't know about the 400 people whose lives you were changing. You were looking at spreadsheets and projected earnings, not humans. That's not an excuse. No, it's not. But it's context." He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I was angry at you for years, Eleanor. Angry at Eleanor Whitman, CEO, the woman who signed the papers that destroyed my life. But the woman in my cabin right now, She's not that person anymore. Maybe she never really was. Eleanor felt something cracking inside her chest. I'm so sorry, Caleb. I'm so sorry about Rachel, about your job, about all of it. If I could go back, you can't. None of us can. His voice was gentle now. But you can go forward differently. That's what I've been trying to do for 4 years. Build something better from the wreckage. How, the word came out broken. How do you build something better when you've caused so much damage? One day at a time. One choice at a time. He moved closer and Eleanor saw the pain in his eyes, his old pain, scarred over but never fully healed. Rachel used to say that guilt was only useful if it changed your behavior. Otherwise, it was just self-indulgence. She was right. She usually was. He smiled sad and small. Look, I'm not going to pretend this isn't complicated. Part of me still wants to be angry at you. But a bigger part recognizes that we're both just people who've been hurt by a system that values profit over humanity. You were a cog in that machine, even if you were a powerful cog. I was more than a cog. I ran the machine. And now you don't, so what are you going to do with that freedom? The question hung between them. Eleanor thought about her father's company, the empire she'd built from his ashes. She'd told herself she was honoring his memory, but really she'd been trying to prove something to him, to herself, to everyone who doubted a 19-year-old girl could run a business. I don't know, she said honestly. I've spent 32 years being Eleanor Whitman, CEO. I don't know who Eleanor is without that title. So find out. You've got time. But did she? The real world was still out there waiting. Her lawyers would need to talk to her. The board would want official statements. The media would hunt for her eventually. I should leave, Eleanor said. I should let you and Sophie have your life back. I'm disrupting everything. You're not disrupting anything. Caleb's voice was firm. Sophie adores you, and He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I like having you here, even knowing what I know now. Maybe especially knowing it. Why? Because you're trying to be better. That's more than most people do. Eleanor felt tears threatening and pushed them back. She'd cried more in the past few days than she had in the previous decade, all the emotions she'd carefully compartmentalized breaking free. I don't deserve your kindness, she whispered. Maybe not, but you're getting it anyway. He touched her shoulder briefly, a gesture of comfort that lasted only a second, but felt monumental. Come on, fire's probably dying. Sophie will complain if her room gets cold. They returned to the living area, but the easy comfort was gone. Eleanor felt exposed raw. Caleb knew who she was now. Not just a woman lost in a storm, but the woman who'd indirectly destroyed his life. How could he stand to look at her? But when they sat by the fire, when Caleb handed her tea and settled into his chair with a book, everything seemed normal, almost peaceful. Caleb, yeah, thank you for telling me, for not asking me to leave. Where would you go? It was meant to be a practical question, but it hit deeper. Where would she go? The penthouse wasn't home. The office was gone. The carefully curated life she'd built had collapsed, leaving her with nowhere to land, except this cabin in the mountains with a man who had every reason to hate her. I don't know, she said. Then stay until you figure it out. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay in the narrow cot, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Rachel Morgan, a woman she'd never met whose death she'd indirectly caused. If Eleanor hadn't approved that acquisition, if she'd looked deeper into the human cost, instead of just the projected savings, would Rachel still be alive? The guilt was crushing. Around midnight, she heard movement in the main cabin. Caleb probably banking the fire. She should stay in her room, give him privacy. But something drew her out barefoot on the cold floor. He was sitting by the dying fire, a photo album open on his lap. Can't sleep either, he asked without looking up. No. Eleanor sat in the chair opposite him. Is that Rachel? He turned the album so she could see. A beautiful woman with dark hair, and Sophie's eyes smiled from the photograph, her arms around a younger Caleb. Our wedding dated, he said, 15 years ago. We got married at a courthouse because we couldn't afford anything fancy, then had a picnic in the park. She wore a dress she'd bought at a thrift store for $20. She looks happy. She was. We both were. He traced the edge of the photo with one finger. I look at these sometimes and try to remember what that felt like. being young and stupid and sure that everything would work out. Do you, Eleanor asked quietly? Remember, some days, other days it feels like a story about someone else. He closed the album carefully. I keep thinking I should put these away, box them up, so Sophie doesn't have to see me sitting here like this. But I can't. They're all I have left of her. I'm so sorry, Caleb. Stop apologizing. But he said it gently. What happened to Rachel, yes, the job loss was part of the chain of events that led to her death. But there were 100 other factors too. Her decision to take that second job, the truck driver who was texting, the black ice on the road. You can't carry all that weight. Someone should. Why, so you can feel like you're paying penance. Guilt doesn't bring her back. It doesn't help, Sophie. It just makes you miserable. Eleanor felt the tears she'd been holding back finally break free, hot tracks down her cold cheeks. I don't know how to live with it, knowing what I did. The same way I live with knowing I let her take that job. The same way I live with the fact that our last conversation was an argument about Sophie's bedtime. He looked at her directly, his eyes bright with their own unshed tears. You forgive yourself even when you don't think you deserve it. Because the alternative is staying stuck in the past, and that helps no one. I don't know if I can. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. He stood taking the photo album with him. Get some sleep, Eleanor. The world's going to look different in the morning. But when morning came, the world looked exactly the same. Snow falling gently, Sophie chattering over breakfast, Caleb moving through his routines with quiet efficiency. It was Eleanor who felt different. She helped with breakfast, with dishes, with Sophie's lessons. But her mind was elsewhere, cycling through possibilities and impossibilities. She could go back to the city, try to rebuild her reputation. But for what? To create another empire that would chew up people like Caleb and spit them out. She could disappear completely. Change her name, start over somewhere new, but running had never solved anything, and she was tired of running. Or she could stay here in this cabin, in this liminal space between who she'd been and who she might become. But that wasn't fair to Caleb and Sophie. They'd saved her, sheltered her, but she couldn't camp in their lives forever. You're thinking too hard, Caleb said at lunch. I can hear it from here. Sorry. Don't be sorry. Just talk to me. What's going on in that head? Eleanor looked at Sophie, who was absorbed in drawing a picture of the varied thrush, then back at Caleb. I need to make some decisions about what comes next. Okay, but I don't want to make them yet. Also okay. Is it, Eleanor leaned forward, I can't just exist in this holding pattern. Eventually I need to figure out my life. Why? The question threw her. Because that's what adults do. We make plans, take action, move forward. And how's that worked out for you so far? She almost laughed. Fair point. Maybe, Caleb said carefully, the answer isn't to figure everything out right now. Maybe it's just to be here and see what emerges. That's not very practical. Neither is driving into a blizzard. But here you are. Sophie looked up from her drawing. Are you leaving soon? I don't know, sweetheart. I hope you don't. It's nice having you here. Dad smiles more. Caleb's ears went slightly red, but he didn't deny it. That afternoon, Eleanor borrowed Caleb's satellite phone and made a call she'd been dreading. Her lawyer answered on the second ring, his relief palpable, even through the tinny connection. Eleanor, thank God. We've been trying to reach you for days. I know, I needed time to think. Well, while you've been thinking, things have been happening. The board wants a statement from you. The SEC has questions about the financial irregularities. And there are several media outlets offering significant money for exclusive interviews. Money, of course, because everything came back to money. Tell the board I'll release a statement when I'm ready. Tell the SEC I'll cooperate fully with any investigation. I have nothing to hide. And tell the media no, not now, not ever. Eleanor, I really think you should consider, I'm not interested in selling my story, James. I'm not interested in playing their game anymore. There was a pause. What are you interested in? She looked out the cabin window at Sophie building a snow fort at Caleb, watching her from the porch, ready to help if needed. I'm still figuring that out. After she ended the call, Caleb came inside, stamping snow from his boots. How'd it go? About as expected. The world wants answers I don't have yet. What did you tell them? The truth. That I need more time. He nodded approvingly. Good. That night, their conversation by the fire felt different, charged with something Eleanor couldn't quite name. Caleb told her about his plans for the cabin expansions he wanted to make, maybe a greenhouse for Sophie's garden dreams. Eleanor found herself contributing ideas drawn into the fantasy of a future she had no claim to. You could have an office here, Sophie suggested from the loft where she was supposed to be sleeping. Like Dad's workshop, but for your computer stuff. Sophie bed, Caleb called up. But if Eleanor stays, she needs her own space. Eleanor's just visiting, remember? Visiting can turn into staying, like you said. Caleb shot Eleanor an apologetic look, but she was smiling. She's not wrong. Well, don't encourage her. But later, after Sophie had finally fallen asleep after the fire had burned low again, Caleb said quietly, would you want to stay? I mean, not forever, just longer than a few days. Eleanor's heart did something complicated in her chest. I don't know if that's wise. Probably not, but I'm asking anyway. Why? He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the embers. Because I've been alone for 4 years. Me and Sophie, we've built a good life, but it's just us. And having you here, he trailed off, shaking his head. Never mind, forget I said anything. Caleb, you've got enough to deal with without me adding complications. What if I want complications? He looked at her, then really looked at her, and Eleanor saw the same fear and hope she felt reflected in his eyes. Then stay, he said, at least through the winter. Help us with the wood, the chores. Teach Sophie, figure out what you want your life to be. No pressure, no expectations. Just stay. Eleanor knew she should say no. She should protect this fragile thing between them, should leave before she caused more damage to his life. But she heard herself say, okay, I'll stay. And with those words, she felt the last threads connecting her to Eleanor Whitman, CEO, finally snap. Whoever she was now, whoever she would become, was being born in this moment, in this cabin, with this man who had every reason to hate her, but chose kindness instead. The fire crackled. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and persistent, covering the world in quiet white. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Eleanor Whitman felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Winter deepened. Eleanor lost track of days, let them blur into a rhythm of morning coffee, afternoon chores, evening fires. She'd called her lawyer once more to arrange for the sale of her penthouse. Everything in it could go to auction. She didn't care anymore. She'd kept only what mattered, a few photos, some documents, nothing that wouldn't fit in the single duffel bag Caleb had driven to town to buy for her. The media frenzy had died down eventually, the way these things always did. Some new scandal had replaced her, some fresh face to feast on. James called weekly with updates. The SEC investigation had found nothing criminal, just aggressive tactics that were common in her industry. The board had issued statements distancing the current company from her leadership. Her name was becoming synonymous with cautionary tales about unchecked ambition. Eleanor listened to these updates and felt nothing. That woman, that life felt like a story about someone else. She'd been at the cabin for 6 weeks when she found the box. It was late February, the kind of day where the sun almost felt warm despite the snow. Eleanor was helping Caleb reorganize the storage room, being generous, as she mostly just moved boxes from one spot to another while he did the actual work. What's in this one? She asked, tapping a wooden crate shoved in the back corner. Caleb glanced over and something shifted in his expression. Old stuff, from the house in Seattle. Should I leave it alone? No, you can look if you want. Eleanor opened the crate carefully. Inside were mementos from a life left behind, Sophie's baby shoes, a framed photo of 3 people at the zoo certificates and awards with Rachel Morgan's name on them. She was a teacher, Eleanor said, reading one of the certificates. 3rd grade, 28 kids who adored her. Caleb sat back on his heels, dust on his hands. She used to bring work-home papers to grade lessons to plan. I'd tell her she worked too hard, and she'd say the same thing to me. Eleanor pulled out a notebook, its pages filled with careful handwriting. Lesson plans by the look of it. She flipped through, seeing notes in the margins. Tommy needs extra help with fractions. Maria's grandmother is sick, check in with her. Rachel Morgan had seen her students as people had cared about their whole lives, not just their test scores. She sounds wonderful, Eleanor said. She was. Caleb took the notebook, gently running his thumb over his late wife's handwriting. She would have hated what I became after she died. The hermit thing hiding up here. She always said problems don't solve themselves. So why stay? Because I was angry at the world, at the company that destroyed our stability, at myself for not being enough. He looked up at Eleanor. And because I was scared that if I went back to the city, back to that life, I'd lose Sophie too somehow. That's not irrational. Maybe not, but it's not living either. He carefully returned the notebook to the box. Rachel deserved better than a husband who gave up. Sophie deserves better than a father who's just going through the motions. You're not just going through the motions. You're raising an amazing kid. With your help, he said it quietly. She's thriving with you here. Learning faster, laughing more. You're good for her. Or she's good for me. Can it be both? Before Eleanor could answer, Sophie's voice rang out from the main cabin. Dad? Eleanor, come quick! They rushed out to find Sophie at the window, binoculars pressed to her face, vibrating with excitement. What is it? Caleb asked. Bald eagle on the big pine by the creek. Eleanor grabbed the second pair of binoculars and looked. Sure enough, a massive bird perched on a high branch, its white head distinctive even at a distance. Make a wish, Sophie said, not taking her eyes from the eagle. Eleanor closed her eyes. She didn't wish for anything specific this time, just sent out a general prayer to whatever forces govern the universe. Let me be worthy of this. Let me not mess it up. That evening, after Sophie went to bed, Eleanor helped Caleb with a project he'd been planning, building a bookshelf for Sophie's growing collection. They worked in comfortable silence in his workshop, a shed attached to the cabin that smelled like sawdust and wood oil. You're getting good at this, Caleb said, watching her measure a board. I like working with my hands. There's something honest about it. You build something and it exists. It's not theoretical or abstract. Unlike running a company. Unlike everything I did before. Eleanor marked the board for cutting. In business, you're always playing games, negotiating, positioning, trying to predict what the other side will do. Even when you win, it doesn't feel real. What does feel real? She considered. This, building something with you. Teaching Sophie about compound interest last week and seeing her eyes light up. Splitting wood and feeling my muscles burn. Things with tangible results. Caleb set down his own tools, leaning against the workbench. Can I ask you something? Of course. What are you going to do when winter ends? The question Eleanor had been avoiding. I don't know. You can't hide here forever. I know. But I don't want to go back to that world. I don't want to be that person again. She set down the measuring tape. I've been thinking about it a lot, about what I could do that would actually matter. And I keep coming back to the people I hurt, the 400 workers from your plant and all the others from all the other acquisitions over the years. I made millions while they lost everything. That's not a balance sheet I can ever make right. So what can you do? Eleanor had been researching this using Caleb's satellite internet late at night when she couldn't sleep. There are programs, job training, education grants, small business loans that help displaced workers. Most are underfunded. I could set up a foundation. Use what's left of my money to actually help people instead of just accumulating more. That's a good idea. But it's not enough. She looked at him directly. Money is easy. I could write checks from anywhere. But actually doing the work and being present, learning what people need instead of assuming I know, that's harder. That requires me to be a different person. You're already different than you were 6 weeks ago. Am I, or am I just hiding from consequences? Caleb moved closer, close enough that Eleanor could see the sawdust caught in his hair, the old scar on his chin that she'd been too polite to ask about. You're here, he said. Present, engaged, trying. That's not hiding. That's healing. I don't deserve to heal. Not when so many people are still suffering because of my decisions. Eleanor, he said her name gently. Punishing yourself doesn't help anyone. Rachel used to say that when I'd beat myself up about not making enough money, not being successful enough. She'd tell me that guilt without action was just ego. Your wife was very wise. She was. And she'd tell you the same thing I'm telling you. Stop wallowing and start doing. You want to help people, then help. You want to be different, then be different. but stop waiting for permission to move forward. Eleanor felt something shift inside her like a locked door finally opening. You're right. Of course I am, he smiled. So what's your first step? She thought about it. Talk to the workers from your plant, the ones who are still in the area. Ask them what they need. And set up the foundation. Hire people who actually know what they're doing, who come from those communities. Not more corporate types like me. Good, what else? Stay here, if you'll have me. Learn how to live a life that's not about conquest and control. Figure out who Eleanor is when she's not trying to prove anything. Caleb's expression softened. I'll have you, for as long as you want to stay. The air between them felt charged, full of things unsaid. Eleanor knew she should step back, maintain the careful distance they'd been observing, but she didn't want distance anymore. Caleb, I know this is complicated, he said quickly. I know I should probably keep things professional between us. You're dealing with a lot, and I'm still working through losing Rachel. But I can't stop thinking about you, about us, about what this could be. Eleanor's heart was hammering. What do you want it to be? I don't know, something real, something honest. Not a relationship built on who we used to be, but who we're becoming. I want that too, but I'm scared I'll hurt you. Hurt Sophie, I'm not good at this, at people, at relationships, at letting anyone close. Then learn, same way you learn to split wood and build bookshelves. One day at a time. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. But Eleanor leaned in instead, and when his hand cupped her cheek, it felt like coming home. They didn't kiss. It wasn't time for that yet. But they stood close, breathing the same air, letting the possibility hang between them. One day at a time, Eleanor repeated, starting tomorrow, starting now. That night, Eleanor lay in her cot and thought about futures, not the corporate planning kind with 5-year projections and strategic initiatives, but real futures built from choices made day by day. She could love this man, was maybe already falling in love with him, with his quiet strength and gentle humor, and the way he saw her, not Eleanor Whitman, CEO, but just Eleanor. A woman trying to be better. She could be a part of Sophie's life, help raise this brilliant, kind child. Not as a replacement for Rachel, that would be impossible and wrong, but as someone who cared, who showed up, who stayed. She could build something meaningful with the wreckage of her old life, help people instead of using them, create community instead of empire. It wouldn't be easy. Old habits died hard, and she still had moments where her instinct was to control, to dominate, to win. But Caleb called her on it when it happened, and Sophie rolled her eyes in that way only preteens could, and gradually Eleanor was learning to let go. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor started making calls. She contacted former employees from Caleb's plant, introduced herself honestly. I'm the person who approved the closure that cost you your job, and asked what they needed. The responses varied. Some hung up, some swore at her, but others slowly started to talk. They needed job training for new industries. They needed help with medical bills from injuries that happened when they were still insured. They needed someone to acknowledge that they existed, that their work had mattered, that they weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. Eleanor listened, took notes, promised nothing she couldn't deliver. She worked with lawyers to establish the foundation, named it the Rachel Morgan Fund at Caleb's Fair's suggestion. Hired directors who came from working-class backgrounds, who understood what displacement actually meant. And slowly, painfully, she started to make amends. It would never be enough. She couldn't undo the harm she'd caused. But she could try to do better going forward. March brought the first hints of spring. Snow still fell, but less frequently. Caleb and Sophie started planting their garden, showing Eleanor seed catalogs and debating tomato varieties. You'll help, right? Sophie asked one evening, looking up from a particularly colorful page. With the garden. Eleanor met Caleb's eyes across the table. They'd been careful not to make promises, not to assume too much. But Sophie deserved honesty. If I'm still here, Eleanor said gently, yes, I'll help. Why wouldn't you be here? Sophie, Caleb said quietly, no, it's okay. Eleanor took a breath. The truth is, sweetie, I'm still figuring out where I belong. I love being here with you and your dad, but I don't want to intrude on your life. You're not intruding. You're family. The word hit Eleanor square in the chest. Family. When had she last been part of a family? Her father had died when she was 19. Her mother had remarried and moved to Florida, sent Christmas cards with increasingly impersonal messages. Eleanor had colleagues, employees, professional relationships built on mutual benefit. But family people who cared about her for no strategic reason. I'd like to be, Eleanor said, her voice rough. If you'll have me. But Sophie launched herself at Eleanor, hugging her fiercely. Of course we'll have you. Tell her, Dad. Tell her she belongs here. Caleb was smiling that soft smile Eleanor had learned meant he was feeling too much to put into words easily. You belong here, Eleanor, for as long as you want to stay. That night after Sophie finally went to bed, Eleanor and Caleb sat on the porch despite the cold. The sky was clear stars, brilliant against the black. I meant it, Caleb said, about you belonging here. I know, but I'm terrified. Every relationship I've ever had, I've destroyed through neglect or ambition or just being unavailable. What if I do that to us? What if you don't? Eleanor laughed shakily. That's not very comforting. It's honest. He reached over, taking her hand. His fingers were warm despite the cold. Look, I'm scared too. I loved Rachel so much. And when I lost her, I thought that was it for me. That I'd had my chance at happiness and it was gone. But then you showed up and something in me woke up again. I'm not her. I know, I don't want you to be her. I want you to be you, complicated, driven, still figuring yourself out. That's who I'm falling for. Eleanor turned to look at him, really look at him. You're falling for me. Yeah, I tried to fight it, told myself it was too soon, too complicated. But turns out the heart doesn't care much about logic. Mine either. She squeezed his hand. I'm falling for you too. For both of you. This whole life you've built here. It's everything I didn't know I needed. So stay, not as a guest, not as someone just passing through. Stay and be part of this family. Eleanor felt tears tracking down her cheeks, hot against her cold skin. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'll stay. I'll try. I'll probably screw up sometimes. We both will. But I want this, want you, want to build something real for the first time in my life. Caleb pulled her close and Eleanor let herself be held. They sat like that for a long time, watching stars wheel overhead, feeling winter slowly loosen its grip on the mountains. When they finally went inside, Caleb walked Eleanor to the storage room door like he did every night. But this time, instead of their usual good night, he kissed her forehead gently. Good night, Eleanor. Good night, Caleb. It was such a small thing, but it felt enormous, a promise, a beginning, a choice to stop hiding from the possibility of love. Eleanor lay in her cot that night, listening to the cabins settle around her, and thought about Grace. She didn't deserve what she'd found here. Didn't deserve Caleb's forgiveness, or Sophie's affection, or this chance to become someone better. But she was learning that grace wasn't about deserving. It was about receiving a gift you couldn't earn and choosing to honor it through how you lived afterward. She'd spent 32 years trying to earn her place in the world through achievement and control. Now finally she was learning to simply accept being loved. Outside, a lone owl called. Inside, the fire crackled low. And Eleanor Whitman, no longer CEO, no longer running, no longer alone, finally slept without dreams of falling. Spring came slowly to the mountains. By late April, the snow had retreated to shaded patches under the trees. Sophie's garden plots were tilled and ready marked with string and stakes. Eleanor had learned to identify birds by their calls, could split wood without thinking about it, knew which floorboards creaked in the morning. She'd been at the cabin for 4 months. The Rachel Morgan Fund was operational now, with an office in Seattle and staff who actually knew what they were doing. Eleanor still consulted, still made decisions, but she'd learned to delegate, to trust people who knew their communities better than she ever would. Some of the former workers had accepted her help. Others never would, and Eleanor had made peace with that. Forgiveness wasn't owed to her. All she could do was try to cause less harm going forward. She'd also made peace with the media narrative. Eleanor Whitman, fallen CEO, had become Eleanor Whitman, philanthropist in exile. The stories wrote themselves, powerful woman humbled, seeking redemption through charity. It wasn't quite true, but it was close enough that she didn't bother correcting it. The truth was simpler and more complicated. She was just a person trying to figure out how to live a good life. Some days she succeeded, some days she failed. but she kept trying. Eleanor, Dad, come see. Sophie's excited call pulled Eleanor from her thoughts. She'd been sitting on the porch, coffee growing cold in her hands, watching clouds move across the valley below. Inside, Sophie had her laptop open, the one Eleanor had bought for her homeschooling, showing a video of bald eagles nesting nearby. There are babies, Sophie said, practically bouncing. 3 of them. Can we go see? That's a pretty far hike, Caleb said, but he was already checking his trail map. We'd need to camp overnight. Please, Eleanor hasn't been camping yet. She needs the full mountain experience. Eleanor laughed. I've been living in a cabin in the woods for 4 months. Isn't that camping? No, Sophie said seriously. Camping is sleeping in a tent. Different thing entirely. Caleb met Eleanor's eyes over his daughter's head, eyebrows raised in question. Eleanor nodded. Okay, Caleb said. This weekend. But Eleanor, fair warning, Sophie's idea of camping involves extensive bird watching and very little actual sleeping. I can live with that. That Saturday, they set out early with packs full of gear Eleanor barely knew how to use. Caleb was patient, showing her how to distribute weight, how to read trail markers, how to pace herself on the uphill stretches. You're doing great, he said during a water break. Most people are gasping by now. I've been splitting wood with you for months. I'm stronger than I look. I know, I've noticed. The look he gave her was warm, intimate, full of things they hadn't quite said yet. They'd been careful with their relationship, letting it develop slowly. Kisses goodnight, hands held during evening walks, but nothing rushed. Both of them were learning how to love again after loss, how to trust that good things could last. They reached the camping spot by late afternoon, a clearing near a creek with views of the valley, and more importantly, a distant view of the eagle nest through binoculars. While Caleb and Eleanor set up tents, Sophie was glued to her binoculars, narrating every movement from the nest. The mama just brought food. I can see the babies' heads. Oh my gosh, they're so fluffy. Eleanor hammered in tent stakes, following Caleb's instructions, and felt content in a way she never had before. This was simple, physical, real. No board meetings, no hostile takeovers, no careful political maneuvering. Just her Caleb, Sophie, and the mountains. That evening, they cooked dinner over a camp stove, nothing fancy, just pasta and sauce, and ate watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that seemed impossible. Best meal ever, Sophie declared through a mouthful of pasta. Really, Eleanor said. Better than your dad's venison stew. Different category. This is camping food. Automatically better. After dinner, after the dishes were cleaned and the food hung safely away from bears, they sat around a small fire Caleb had built. Sophie eventually crawled into her tent, exhausted from the hike and the excitement, leaving Eleanor and Caleb alone under more stars than this seemed possible. Thank you, Eleanor said quietly, for this, for everything. You don't have to thank me. I do, though. You saved my life, Caleb. Not just from the storm, but from myself, from that hollow existence I'd built. He reached over, taking her hand. You saved yourself. I just gave you a place to land while you figured it out. I love you. The words came out before Eleanor fully realized she was going to say them, but once they were out, she didn't want to take them back. I love you, both of you, this life we're building. Caleb was quiet for a moment, firelight playing across his face. I love you too. I've been trying to find the right time to say it, but I don't think there is a right time. It just is. Eleanor moved closer, letting him pull her against his side. They sat like that, watching embers float upward and toward the stars. Rachel would have liked you, Caleb said eventually. She always said the people most worth knowing were the ones brave enough to change. I'm not sure I'm brave, mostly just stubborn. Same things sometimes. Eleanor thought about that, about stubbornness as a form of bravery, about refusing to give up even when everything seemed lost. What do you want, Eleanor? Caleb asked. Long term, I mean. Are you happy here, or is this just a way station before you figure out what's next? It was a fair question. Eleanor had been asking herself the same thing. I want to stay, she said, but I don't want to disrupt what you and Sophie have built. This is your sanctuary. It's our sanctuary now, all 3 of us. He shifted to look at her directly. Move in properly, not as a guest in the storage room, but as part of this family. Help me raise Sophie, build the foundation, live this life for real. Are you sure? I'm sure. Sophie's sure. She's been asking when you're going to officially move into the extra bedroom since February. The only one who seems uncertain is you. Eleanor felt tears threatening again. She cried more in the past 4 months than in the previous 30 years. Combined all the emotions she'd suppressed, finally finding release. I'm scared, she admitted. I've never been good at this at family, at stability, at letting people depend on me. What if I screw it up? Then we'll figure it out together. That's what families do. I don't have a good track record with family. Neither do I. My parents died when I was young. Rachel's family never approved of me. We made our own family, me and Rachel and Sophie. Now we're making a new one. It doesn't have to look like anyone else's version. Eleanor kissed him, then properly deeply, letting herself feel the warmth and solidity of him. When they pulled apart, both breathing harder, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. So, he said, will you stay, really stay? Yes, I'll stay. They stayed up talking, making plans, real plans about futures and possibilities. They'd expand the cabin, add that extra bedroom properly, maybe a real office space for Eleanor's foundation work. Sophie would keep homeschooling, but maybe with some supplemental classes in town as she got older. Eleanor would sell the last of her corporate holdings, put the money into the foundation, and into this new life. She'd never be wealthy again the way she had been, but she'd be rich in ways that actually mattered. What about marriage? Eleanor asked the question that's surprising her as much as it seemed to surprise Caleb. Are you asking me to marry you? Maybe I don't know. I've never done this before. She laughed nervously. I want you to know I'm serious. This isn't a phase or a breakdown or a rich woman playing at simple living. This is my life now. You're my life. I know. He kissed her gently. And when we're both ready, when Sophie's had time to adjust to this new normal, then we'll talk about marriage. But there's no rush. We have time. The thing Eleanor had always fought against, tried to maximize, treated as an enemy to be conquered. Now it felt like a gift. They eventually went to their separate tents. Sophie would have questions. If they shared questions, they weren't quite ready to answer yet. But as Eleanor lay in her sleeping bag, listening to the creek and the night birds, she felt more settled than she ever had. The next morning they woke to Sophie's whispered excitement. The eagles were active, feeding their young. They spent hours watching through binoculars, Sophie taking notes in her nature journal, Caleb making sketches. Eleanor just absorbing the miracle of wild things being wild. I want to work with birds, Sophie announced at lunch. When I grow up, be an ornithologist or a conservationist or something. You'd be great at that, Eleanor said. Will you help me, with the science part? Dad's good at a lot of things, but advanced biology isn't really his thing. Caleb laughed. True. I tap out at basic anatomy. I'd love to help, Eleanor said. And she meant it. She could see it, years of helping Sophie with school, watching her grow and learn, being there for graduations and college, and whatever came next. Being family. They hiked back to the cabin Sunday evening, tired and happy. That week, Eleanor started officially moving her things from the storage room to the extra bedroom, the one next to Caleb's, with windows overlooking the valley. It was bigger than the storage room, with space for a real desk and bookshelves. Caleb had built her a closet, refusing to let her pay him for the lumber. Consider it a housewarming gift, he said. But I'm not warming a new house. You're warming our house, same thing. Sophie helped Eleanor arrange her books, chattering about which ones she wanted to borrow, which ones Eleanor should read next. It was domestic and normal, and everything Eleanor had never let herself want. That night, their first night with Eleanor, officially moved in, they had a small celebration. Sophie made cupcakes, slightly lopsided, heavily frosted. Caleb cooked Eleanor's favorite meal. He'd been paying attention to what she enjoyed, had been learning her preferences, the way she'd been learning his. After dinner, after Sophie went to bed, Eleanor and Caleb sat on the porch in the warm spring evening. Feel different? Caleb asked. Living here officially. It feels right, Eleanor said. Like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be. Good. He pulled her close, kissing her temple. Because I can't imagine this place without you anymore. They sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies start to emerge as darkness fell. Eleanor thought about the woman she'd been when she'd stumbled to this cabin 5 months ago. That woman had been broken, lost, running from everything she'd built because it had turned to ashes in her hands. This woman, the one sitting on a porch in borrowed jeans and one of Caleb's flannel shirts. Her hands calloused from work, her heart full in a way it had never been. This woman was real. No regrets, Caleb asked quietly. Eleanor thought about her corner office, her Mercedes, her penthouse with its view of the city, thought about power lunches and board meetings, and the thrill of closing a major deal. None, she said, and meant it completely. Over the following weeks, they settled into their new normal. Eleanor worked on the foundation from her new office, taking video calls with her staff, reviewing grant applications. But she also helped with Sophie's lessons, split wood with Caleb, planted the garden they'd planned together. In June, she got a call from James, her lawyer. The SEC officially closed their investigation, he said. No charges, no fines. You're clear. Okay, that's it. Just okay, Eleanor, you could rebuild now. Use this clean slate to start another company. Make a comeback. The business world loves a good redemption story. I'm not interested in redemption stories, James. I'm interested in living my life. But thank you for everything. Send me your final bill. We're done here. After she hung up, Caleb looked at her from across the cabin. Everything okay? Everything's perfect. I'm officially free from my old life. How does it feel? Eleanor walked over, wrapped her arms around him, breathed in the smell of sawdust and coffee that meant home now. It feels like I can finally start living. That evening, they told Sophie about their relationship, that they were together officially, and that meant some changes, but mostly things staying the same. Sophie looked at them like they were deeply silly. I know, Dad. I've known for weeks. You guys are not subtle. Oh, Caleb said. Well, okay then. Can I call Eleanor Mom? The question hung in the air. Eleanor felt her throat close up. You don't have to, she managed. I'm not trying to replace your mother. I know, but I like having a mom again. And you're here and you love us, and that's what moms do, right? Eleanor looked at Caleb, who was trying not to cry. He nodded. I would be honored, Eleanor said, if you want to call me that. Cool, can we have ice cream to celebrate? They had ice cream. They sat on the porch watching the sunset. They were a family, non-traditional, built from grief and chance and choice, but real. The summer passed in a blur of garden work, foundation projects, family hikes. Eleanor's hair grew longer, her skin tanned from outdoor work, her body stronger from the physical life she led now. She barely recognized herself in photos, and that was fine. She wasn't that polished CEO anymore. She was Eleanor Morgan. She'd taken Caleb's name quietly, legally, a few weeks after moving in fully. A woman who split wood and grew tomatoes and loved fiercely the family she'd found. In August, on a day when the heat made them lazy, they drove to town for supplies. Eleanor rarely went to town. She wasn't hiding anymore, but she preferred the quiet of the cabin. But they needed things the catalog couldn't provide, and it was a family outing. In the hardware store, while Caleb and Sophie debated paint colors for Sophie's room, a woman approached Eleanor. Excuse me, but are you Eleanor Whitman? Eleanor's first instinct was to deny it, but she'd promised herself she'd stop hiding. I'm Eleanor Morgan now. I thought so. I recognized you from the news from before. The woman hesitated. I worked at the textile plant in Cascade Falls, the one your company closed 10 years ago. Here it was. Eleanor braced herself. I just wanted to say thank you, the woman continued. The foundation, my daughter got one of the nursing scholarships. She's starting school in September. It's changing our lives. Eleanor felt tears prickling. I'm glad we could help. It doesn't fix everything. A lot of us are still angry about what happened, but it's something. It means someone cares. The woman smiled. So thank you. After she left, Caleb put his arm around Eleanor. You okay? Yeah, I think I am. That night back at the cabin, Eleanor sat on the porch alone for a while after Sophie and Caleb went to bed. The stars were brilliant the way they always were this far from city lights. She thought about the woman in the hardware store, about all the people she'd hurt knowingly or unknowingly in her drive to succeed. She couldn't undo that harm, couldn't make it right with money or good intentions, but she could treat on. Every day she could try to do better. Hey, she turned. Caleb stood in the doorway, backlit by the warm light from inside. Thought you were asleep, Eleanor said. Bed's cold without you. He came to sit beside her. What are you thinking about? How different my life is now. How much better it is even though I lost everything I thought mattered. You didn't lose everything. You let go of things that were crushing you. Same result, different process. Losing implies something was taken. Letting go means you chose. Eleanor leaned against him. When did you get so wise? When I met a woman who was brave enough to walk through a blizzard instead of giving up. She taught me a lot about choosing to keep going. They sat together watching stars wheel overhead, and Eleanor thought about hope. For so long, she'd thought hope was about winning, achieving, conquering. But real hope was quieter than that. It was choosing to plant a garden in the spring, trusting that winter would end. It was loving someone despite knowing you could lose them. It was showing up every day and trying to be better than you were yesterday. I love you, she said. I love you too. Simple words, but they contained everything. The past they'd both survived, the present they were building, the future stretching ahead of them, full of ordinary miracles. Inside, Sophie shifted in her sleep. Tomorrow they'd work in the garden, Eleanor would take calls for the foundation, Caleb would fix the fence that was coming loose. Small things, normal things, the substance of a real life. Eleanor Whitman had lost an empire, but Eleanor Morgan had found something infinitely more valuable, a place to belong, people to love, and the quiet knowledge that she was finally, after 52 years, exactly who she was meant to be. No titles, no corner offices, no quarterly reports. Just a woman, a family, and a cabin in the mountains where winter had taught her how to survive and spring had taught her how to grow. When she and Caleb finally went to bed, Eleanor fell asleep quickly. Caleb's arms around her, the sound of the forest outside their window. And for the first time in her entire life, she dreamed not of falling, but of flying.